So, can we look at wine today? Let's look at wine.
It's in the lesson?
Rabbi Natan, it's very interesting, okay? If you look at Likutei Moharan, it's always interesting to see how, just as I outlined, the Likutei Moharan, it's structured as commentary, or more accurately as expansion of Likutei Moharan, but using the structure of the Shulchan Aruch.
Okay.
Now, we know that Rabbi Natan was a very meticulous, to be very accurate and very on point in representing exactly what Rabbi Nachman was trying to say. So much so that of all Rabbi Nachman's students, and he had at least 6 or 7, Rabbi Nachman said, Rabbi Natan, he's the only one that knows what I'm saying. So he's been given the seal of approval that he knows what it says. Okay. If you want to see a good example of this, classic is, if you read Likutei Moharan and you read Likutei Halachot, it feels like 2 different texts, right?
Yeah.
You feel it, right? Like Likutei Halachot, Rabbi Natan writes very smooth, easy to read, enjoyable, and Rabbi Nachman writes typically very dense. You have to crack a nut and use your mind, and you can't relax. You have to really focus, and you have to get into it to extract. Because Rabbi Nachman is really trying to pack in a lot.
There's a lot in there I found when we were learning with Rabbi Kidabinsky, that you'd go into a point, and the next point, and you'd circle back and connect back to this point, and go to that point, and this point. And that's just the way it's sort of written.
Right.
And to follow along the lot, you can feel your brain kind of all these different cells connecting.
And you should
just
know,
to follow
most of these lessons. I don't know if it's most. I don't know the exact details, but a big portion of the lessons are Rabbi Natan listening and transcribing them.
Okay.
Often paraphrasing, but paraphrasing accurately, meaning he had the right to paraphrase. Some lessons it starts with as Lashon Rabbeinu. That Rabbeinu himself said it, and some lessons it says Lashon Chaverim.
Okay.
The friends, that means not Rabbi Natan.
Right.
And you can see when it says Lashon Chaverim, it's very different than when. So already you see that. But there is a lesson in the second part of the Likutei Moharan called, I think it's called the Geret or Torah Mem Chet Tinyana 48. Very easy lesson to read. Just pure encouragement. Just my friend. And it feels like Rabbi Natan is writing it.
Right.
So it just shows you that Rabbi Natan has the mindset of Rabbi Natan. Why am I saying all of this? Because Likutei Halachot is structured according to the Shulchan Aruch. Now, we wonder why Rabbi Natan takes a specific halacha and chooses that halacha to expand a lesson.
Okay.
So we're coming from a premise that it's not at random.
Right.
So if he does, means there's clearly a connection within the lesson that connects it to this particular halacha. Usually, it's pretty obvious. Many times it's not. In the case of our lesson, it's not. For example, in the case of this lesson, he talks about Yain Nesach. Yain Nesach is wine that was touched by a non-Jew.
Right, okay.
It's not kosher. So he chooses this lesson to explain why wine touched by non-Jews kosher. Where in this lesson is there anything about wine?
I don't know where there is in the lesson, but there's definitely in the story. The Lost Princess.
Very good. It's a very good reference. And we know that this lesson is on the story.
Yes.
So we have the river of wine.
Yep.
Very good. That's a good one. I also found, digging a little bit, and Rabbi Avram brings it in Koch Ve'or. Here in Otchet, very, very briefly, Otchet, how do you say Saif?
Saif?
Chapter? No.
Chapter?
Sub-chapter. Paragraph?
Paragraph 8. In
Okay.
paragraph 8 of this lesson, Rabbi Nachman decides to talk about trust.
Right.
and the betrayal of trust.
Oh, sort of like what's going on in the world today.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And he specifically focuses on in the context of a husband and a wife,
Okay.
right? And he brings two examples. One of them is Batach Ba'lev Ba'ala, right? There's a trust between the husband and the wife. And the other example is from Micha, the prophet, that says there will come a time when the world is going to be so bad that that a man won't feel that he can even trust his own wife. Rabbeinu contrasts these two types of trusts and explains why one is like this and why one is like that. But in the context of bringing that, he brings the Shlomo Melech, the line of Batach from Eshet Chayil, Batach Ba'alev Ba'ala. He brings the line of Shlomo Melech, and he also brings that part a little bit before Eshet Chayil. So if you look at that chapter, what's happening is Shlomo Melech just built the Beit HaMikdash. And that night, after the celebration, he drinks wine and he gets drunk. He marries the daughter of Paro, and then his mother Bathsheba comes and she reprimands him, and she tells him, "What are you doing?" And Rabbi Nachman brings a few psukim from that story. So all that to tell you that talks about the effects of wine. The Gemara in Sanhedrin also talks about that, and how that's the famous Gemara that talks about the wine and how the wine can affect a person in different ways. So over there. So from there we're ready. So we have just two simple connections of wine in this lesson. No, it's not explicit, but it's implicit. Implicit enough that Rabbi Natan thinks and has decided to make the connection, to talk about it. So we'll look today at how Rabbi Natan explains wine and how it affects and what it has to do with the lesson and what we're talking about. Okay, so this will help us a little bit freshen things up, but also get back into the flow. And that's 462. Here, Yain Nesech 2, Halacha Bet. Okay, so we're going to look at Rabbi Natan. When he introduces the Likutei Moharan, he always brings the segment from within the lesson that he wants to focus on. Okay. So the segment he's bringing here is Kitab B'Mamar Patach Rabbi Shimon B'Likutei Harishon שעל ידי סיפור מעשיות מעוררים השינה. כי יש בני אדם שישנים וטמאיהם ויש נפלו בבחינת שינה וגם תאוות תחלה. The first thing he brings is that people can sleep away their lives. Right? There's this idea, there's this concept, there's this notion that people can go through their lives asleep. And the remedy for that is Sipur Masiot. This is in the lesson we're talking about. The remedy to wake people up from their sleep is storytelling. And what is the example? Do you remember how people can fall asleep? So the people, one way to fall asleep is, or one way to get, when we say sleep, going forward, when we say sleep, we're referring to a disconnect of meaning.
Spiritual sleep.
Yeah, spiritual sleep. So it says a person can be engaged, right, in our lesson. A person can be engaged in Torah mitzvot and be fully asleep. How? Rabbeinu says how? Through eating. It says that there's food that have this dual power. Food has the power to wake a person up, but also food has the power to put a person asleep. And the way Rabbi Nachman explains it is that machal shelo nitzbarer adayin, food that has not been sorted. The term birurim in Arizal teaching and in general is that everything comes in mixed. There's good and bad. So food is a very good example of this. And food, for example, if you take an orange, can I eat this orange right now?
No.
Why not?
It's got the peel on it.
It's got the peel.
Maybe it's
So-
got pits in there.
Pits, right? So I peel off the peel. I did one layer of sorting.
Right.
Take off the pits. I did another layer of sorting. This is called sorting. And even so that's like my hands are doing the sorting. But even when I eat, my body's still gonna sort it further, right? And it's gonna extract what it needs and keep until it's like, I don't know, 10% is what we actually retain. You know, the famous thing about the man that was 100% that didn't need it to be sorted, right?
Yeah.
So that's called birurim. So it says sometimes food, for whatever reason, in today's processed world, it's probably very easy to figure that out. Food can easily be not fully sorted.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, there's something in the food that has the potency to put a person to sleep.
Part of the idea behind Turuma and Maser? You have to sort through food?
I don't know. It might be. I'm sure if you... Rabbi Nachman said that you could take every one of my lessons
Right.
and figure out any part of the Torah you want with it.
Okay.
So I'm sure if you use this lesson as a deciphering tool,
Right.
it can probably shed some light on that.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Right.
Okay, so what happens is, so when a person eats food that has not been sorted, he loses his da'at, and he loses his face. He has no more face left in the story. He's out. He loses his face. His face equals the face of the Torah.
I heard that food gets turned into blood right away. It's part of the process. And you're literally, that becomes your blood, but somebody could be like totally on path. You start eating non-kosher food and within a week, become spiritually stupid.
Yeah, I heard that too. I remember hearing that many years ago. Food actually creates this blockage very strong, like non-kosher food.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now within kosher food is more subtle blockage. That means a person can still be connected to our mitzvot, but there's something that's more subtle that's happening. Okay, so now we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this. This is the lesson. And now we're going to explain what does it have to do with wine. Because if we think about it, it's a very bizarre thing that if a goy touches wine, right? We're not talking about the ingredients. Unlike pretty much everything else kosher, I don't think there exists any other kosher food, any other food,
Right.
where that becomes treif by touch. As far as I know, maybe in some specific scenarios, but wine is very easy. It's open, you touch it, it's game over. So what is this bizarre halacha, and why does it apply specifically to wine? Let's understand the context of this. So we know what is the halacha. This is the isur, the prohibition of yain nesach. What is the prohibition? That wine that was touched by akum, wine that was touched by a Gentile, and well, specifically Allah is talking about someone who is who does avodah zarah, but for all intents and purposes, wine that has been touched by a Gentile is prohibited immediately. The reason is because wine causes a person to go to sleep. Let's explain what that means. So we know just trying to organize this here. כי תכף כשנוגע בו העקום נמשך העין מבחינת שינה שהוא הסתכלות ה-70 פנים של התורה. נחמת שהיה מביא שינה ויש באחיזת השינה של מנת מבחינת. Okay, so wine, I feel like it's missing something here. Wine has, the Gemara says, wine has two powers. Wine has two abilities that it can do for a person. One thing wine can do is what the Gemara refers to as rosh. Zacha na'aseh rosh. Wine has the ability to open up the eyes of a person to feel Hashem. It's literally the high you get from wine, where you're feeling good, or alcohol. For all intents and purposes, when we say wine, we're talking about all alcohol. But wine is the ultimate alcohol. It's the ultimate. It's the most original. It existed forever, right? The least amount of processing needed. So wine has, the Gemara says, Zacha na'aseh rosh, lo zacha na'aseh rash. Wine has dual ability. On the one hand, it has the ability to open the eyes of a person to see what is happening in the reality around him, and to see that Hashem is behind everything, causing the person to feel good. Like if you think about it, why, when a person has a few cups of l'chaim and he feels good, why is he feeling good? Psychologically, not the biochemistry. What's happening in a person's mind that he feels good? Ever thought about it? What's going on? Simply put, the person, he sees the reality differently. He sees in the positive, he sees that everything has meaning. And that excites the person. That gives the person encouragement. It makes him excited. It makes him feel like life is worth living, so to speak. Right? And that can cause a person to do teshuvah. It can cause a person to connect to Hashem. So we just experienced Purim.
People who go into alcoholism means of escape.
So that's the other part.
Right.
So the Gemara concludes. So the first one is called Zacha na'aseh rosh.
Okay.
That the alcohol and the wine have the ability to open the eyes up of a person and show him that Hashem is running the world, and that causes the person to feel really good, and it causes the person to be connected to Hashem. That's why the Torah is always encouraging us to drink wine. On the flip side, the Gemara says lo zacha, it has a potent power, and that is na'aseh rash. Rash means poor, referring to poor in the mind. That means the flip is that it pulls a person into the temptation, into the hedonism. It means wine has the ability to make a person feel more his body, and whatever urges his body has, wine can wake up those urges as well. So it can awaken the urges of the neshama and the desire of the neshama, or it can awaken the desires of the body, which is effectively putting the person asleep, right? Because now he's not only not aware of Hashem, he's even more aware of his animalistic self, right? So the person now has gone deeper into the sleep, and Hashem is really not in the picture. So if before he had a chance, wine has a person to completely, you go to a bar and you see people drunk and doing all sorts of crazy things, that's the deep layer of sleep. So now Rabbi Natan says there are 70 facets of Torah. 70 facets of Torah. And against these 70 facets of Torah, so the 70 facets of Torah provide anpi nehirin, right? Light. They provide light, they lighten up the reality. But against that, there are 70 channels of darkness to block those light, to block those sources of light. I mean, what that means practically is if a person does tshuva, it means he sees the light of the Torah. It's open to him. If a person doesn't feel like praying, and if a person doesn't feel like connecting to Hashem, it means it's dark, right? So there's 70 ones of this side and the 70 ones of this side. The Akum, the Gentiles, the Goyim, they have the 70 darknesses, right? V'akum shehem shivim umin, there's 70 nations. Hem bichinat shivim anpin chashuchim, 70 dark faces. It means they disconnect the person from Hashem. So the opposite of the 70 facets of the Torah. מחמת שהיין מביא שינה ויש בו אחיזת השינה, שהוא בחינת הסתלקות השבעים פנים, אבל כן תקף כשנוגעים בו העקום, שהם עיקר בחינת השינה, זה אחלה, בחינת הסתלקות ה-70 פעם לתורה. So as soon as the touches it, אז נמשך העניין לבחינת שינה. So now what happens is that, and so touch, the main connection of our body to reality, to the material, is through our touch. Our hands are our main link with the material world. So the hands represent the most material part of a person is the hands. So when a goy touches wine, they have the material part of the darkness. He touches it, so immediately what he does is removes the potential of wine to show a person that Hashem exists. Now wine has only one power. That wine has only the power to put a person asleep. Spiritual sleep. Such a wine is prohibited to drink. It means the Torah recognizes that wine is a special and unique drink. It's a drink that has, it's not just like any other drink where you drink it for the sake of, drinking because you're thirsty. You don't drink wine. You don't drink wine if you're thirsty. It's like,
if there's river of it, and that's all there is.
I mean, yeah, if that's all there is. But imagine someone's like wakes up in the middle of the night, oh, I'm so thirsty, chugs wine. You don't do that. You can pretty much every other drink you can drink if you're thirsty, but not wine. I don't know about whiskey, but like you don't drink wine if you're thirsty. It's a special drink. When the Torah tells us to drink wine, the Torah is giving us specific instructions. The Torah wants us to get like the Torah's. It might sound controversial, but the Torah wants us to get high off the wine. Whenever the Torah instructs us to drink wine, the Torah wants us to feel the effects of wine. B'diavad, you're yotze with grape juice. Okay, yeah, obviously, yeah. Okay, I'm not, this is not like go take drugs now. The idea is that there is a substance that Hashem created that has the ability to alter his state of consciousness, wine, that the Torah wants us to use in very specific occasions to alter our state of consciousness, to become aware of Hashem. Okay, so that's wine. Now, that potential of altering our state of consciousness to become aware of Hashem gets canceled out as soon as it's touched by a goy. And then no more does it have that potential. It immediately becomes a toxic force that has only one power, to put a person disconnected. That non-bevushal, yeah. To make a person feel disconnected and have no chance of, right, immediately. So then it's asur. Because the whole point of the wine, whereas water doesn't have no potential, not for here, not for there, or any other drink for that matter, doesn't have any, that potential, so therefore it cannot be contaminated. But wine does. And here he brings a interesting remez, yain. This is the Gemara. It says the yain is the gematria 70. And what's the line? Nichnas yain. So that's the gematria 70.
Oh.
Why? Yeah, he says yain nitan b'shivim otiyot, v'sod nitan b'shivim otiyot. Gemara Sanhedrin Memches. Nichnas yain yasasod. They both have 70 letters, meaning their letters both values 70. V'alken b'kedusha.
Did you translate that pasuk? Nichnas yain yasasod.
Yeah.
Did you translate it?
Nichnas yain yasasod.
You have to tell me.
When you drink wine, the secret comes out.
I've heard that.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, so he's going to give us.
Yeah,
So his explanation is different. What is his explanation? His explanation is
So
when you drink,
wine,
yeah, exactly. It says when we drink wine, the sod
in a kedusha way, of course,
of the reality comes out.
Uh-oh.
So now, just a simple question: Why is, and this is almost the whole question of what is referred to as Torah Tasod. Why is Hashem existing in reality referred to as a secret? That's how Rabbi Natan refers to it. He says that when a person drinks wine, it has the potential to reveal the secrets of the reality. What are the secrets of the reality? Which is effectively waking a person up. Is that Hashem is behind. Why is that? Why is it referred to as a secret?
There's a veil covering everyone's eyes. No one. People look good today. They don't see God anymore. They have to open their eyes, literally, figuratively. Let them see the Ma'aru Mosech Hashem, the greatness of Hashem. How He's orchestrating everything, right? It's Purim. It's Purim.
Yeah,
it's
Purim. I was just thinking that right now as you were saying that. It's the story of the Megillah.
So Hashem is acting within nature.
If you read the story of the Megillah, simple reading, there's no indication of a miracle.
No, but when you really look
without the commentary.
Okay.
Simple reading.
This up and this up and this up and this up.
Anyone can read it. There's nothing. We read it because we have decoded it already, and we know what we're reading, right?
Right.
We have revealed the secret. So yeah, it's a secret. It's a secret that Hashem is running the world. So now another connection he made here, and this is the deeper connection that opens up a lot. Secrets are stories. Stories are secrets, and just to connect the dots, let's just contemplate for a second, what's a secret? Give me any example of a secret.
Any example?
Any example of a secret.
What goes on behind
just give me an example. Anything.
government doors?
It's a story, right? You'll tell me a story. Think about it. Mm-hmm. Always a secret is a story. How about this? Give me an example of a secret that's not a story.
Secret ingredient in
No.
dish.
So what's the secret? No, so what's the secret? The secret is the reason this tastes so good is because my grandmother told me to use cumin, whatever. Right? It's a story. A secret is always a story. A secret is basically the dimension that connects all the dots behind something that you don't see. You want to know? You see that guy over there? He is it's like a little story. Now it changes how you look at that guy. Not forget about Lashon Hara, just in general. Or you see that billboard. Did you know who paid for it? Or did you know that billboard? Or the famous story of the Coca-Cola billboard.
Oh, in LA.
LA.
In Israel.
Oh.
You heard about this? So there was a billboard,
right,
in front of in a yeshiva, or in front of a yeshiva, like that was in LA.
It was in LA. Yeah. It was in
So
LA.
it's a billboard in front of a yeshiva. Okay.
Yeah, it's all stuff.
That had an indecent
Okay.
picture.
Okay.
So there was a gentleman a Jew that really bothered him, right?
Right.
And he said how much?
Not a rich guy, like an average guy.
An average guy, and he went over to the advertisement company and he said, how much will it cost to rent this billboard for a day? So they said it's $1,000 a day. I forget what it was.
Right.
He says, I'll pay you for a month.
Right.
I want to rent it for a month and take down whatever you have there.
Right.
I said, okay, 30,000. He said he had a savings account or something.
He took a savings. So he's like,
and he emptied his whole savings account. Now they said, okay, but what do you got to put something up there. He's like, I don't know. Just put the countdown. Do 30 every day, 29, 28.
Right.
He's like, okay.
And they said, okay, fine. So there was a countdown on the billboard. Every day was 29, 28, 27. And then it was Coca-Cola or one of the big companies.
And then near the end, everyone in the neighborhood, and that whole, everyone drove back. It was like a big intersection in LA, from what I understand. They're like, what's going on there? Everyone's like singing for a whole month. They're expecting something to happen.
What's the counting down for?
So they,
So I don't know. Yeah, what was it that?
So like, I guess it was like Coca-Cola decided, like, man, this is a great opportunity here. Like, we're gonna overpay for that billboard, and then after it gets to one, it's gonna be Pepsi. It's gonna be Coca-Cola advertisement. The anticipation was so great.
They wanted to capitalize on the anticipation.
Right. Okay, got it.
And they ended up giving him
$200,000
or something, like ridiculous amount.
They paid an enormous amount because we're after a guy who spent his life savings essentially on this.
Right.
Crazy as that might sound. And should reward him like tenfold or hundredfold.
So what? To put a Coca-Cola ad back up?
They bought it off him.
They bought it off of him.
They bought it off him. Yeah.
Yeah. So that because they realized that anticipation was building and was
so Coke while it was going down, while it's counting down, they bought it off of him.
Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't know. Yeah.
They gave him like tenfold of what he invested to keep. And they bought it off him, so he got his money's worth. He got his money's worth, that's for sure. But the reason I mention it is because story captures people, especially when they see there's a mystery and there's something going on behind the scenes. It's it pulls us in, right?
Okay.
So that's the connection between stories and secrets.
Right.
Secrets and stories, like in English language, maybe it doesn't go together, but the way Rabbi Nathan is phrasing it is that when Rabbi Nachman says, I'm going to tell you a story, what he means is I'm going to tell you what's really going on.
Okay.
That's what he says. And what we understand that to mean is that that's called a secret. If you ever hear a speech, I've been paying attention to speeches from like rabbis. I always notice that when the rabbi says, let me tell you something, people pay attention. No? You ever notice that? Let me tell you something. It's like, what happened? The speech just, like, people woke up or something.
Yeah.
I noticed that. And I think there's something about it. And it's like he's continuing to say what he was saying.
Let me tell you, it's a secret that they teach at the rabbinic school. So when you're giving a speech, just make sure you throw it in now let me tell you something when you want to make your point. Because then they'll pay attention.
I noticed that. Let me tell you something gets people's attention because it's almost like we associate, let me tell you something, but let me reveal to you something that's behind the scenes.
Right.
Let me reveal to you something that you may not have known. That's what people hear. And that captures us. That captures our attention, that pulls us into another realm. So we, as human beings, we want to know the secrets. Now, like we said, of the good and the bad. There's a good version of it and there's a bad version of it. They look the same.
Right.
We are living in a time where stories and secrets are at the height of ever. Like social media is all
It's a story.
It's stories, and it's the story of my life. It's let me show you what's going on behind the scenes of my life. Supposedly, obviously, it's lies, but but the idea is that this is what's going on behind the scenes. Movies. TV shows are at an all-time high. The soul today cannot deal with anything that doesn't reveal some sort of behind-the-scenes element. Dry information is not enough. Our grandparents were perfectly fine with dry information. It didn't feel dry to them. It didn't bother them. They didn't get bored of it. They were fine. It was perfectly satisfactory for them. They were able to observe the commandments. It was not a problem. They didn't feel anything lacking. We're moving into an era where people need to know, they need to feel what's going on behind the scenes. You know, how many times I've heard people say, what do I care about something that happened 5,000 years ago? What does it have to do with me? It's like there's this need for people to see how they're connected in order for someone to practice Torah mitzvot, they need to feel that they're connected to the story. Otherwise, they can't do it. They can't. That's what we're holding today. Like, if you don't show me how I'm connected to this story, that I'm not going to just wrap my hand with a piece of leather. I'm just not going to do that. I don't feel it. But the opposite is also true. But if they do feel that they're connected, they'll do it. They'll do it, no problem. They'll do it. What was it? Was it in Tel Aviv? Like a month ago, There was a Chabad guy, and I think it was in Tel Aviv. He opened up a tefillin booth outside of one of these public schools.
Right.
The public school university, and the teacher shut down his stand. They kicked him out. They said, you can't be putting on tefillin here, and this is in Tel Aviv. The students rebelled, and the next day, like 100 students lined up to put on tefillin.
It's not good. That's human nature, right?
Well, the teacher doesn't want it, therefore it must be good.
But because it was after with the whole climate and everything.
Right.
The students felt like they needed a connection, and this awakened that point inside of them. No, I am connected to the Torah, right? And then they immediately felt the need to put on. But we are definitely in a generation where we need the sod. Torah has sod in general.
Right.
Like chassidut, Baal Shem Tov. It all opens up a realm of Torah where it's about connecting the dots.
Right.
It's showing you this mitzvah actually is a whole other world upon itself, and it's connecting all these different things. That's the definition of sod. It's called sod, like Kabbalah, Arizal. Arizal is like big time. Shara Gilgulim, the Arizal tells you all the Gilgulim.
I've been reading through it. It's pretty wild stuff, I'll tell you.
Adam Arishon and this, and David HaMelech, and then this guy borrowed years from this guy.
Stories.
It's a story, exactly. It's a behind the scenes.
It's a behind the scenes of the pre-world. It's like
Shanim Kadmoniot.
wow.
So this is what Sipur Masiot means. That means Rabbi Nachman, he's what Rabbi Nathan is doing in Likutei Moharan, he's just opening up what it says in Likutei Moharan. So what he's telling us is that when Rabbi Nachman says Sipur Masiot, what he's referring to is we are in an era to wake people up from the sleep, right? We need to have a glimpse into the behind the scenes. Not just a behind the scenes where you're an outsider, but a behind the scenes where we're part of it. And that wakes a person up. That's called Itorut HaShena. A person gets awakened from his sleep because he realizes, wow, there's a story. I'm part of a bigger story. He realizes that, he feels it. He says wine has the ability to do this. So using now the halacha of wine, we're getting now some insight into this lesson. So wine also has the potency to plummet a person further into a deeper sleep. And that's yayin nesach. That is the strict prohibition. I would even say, like the Gemara says, the classic line is yenam mishum bitam. The halacha, or the reason that the Gemara gives for yayin nesach says their wine will bring you to their daughters. Intermarriage.
Okay.
So it's like people question, like, that's wine intermarriage. And some commentaries, they say, well, you start hanging out with them, you familiarize, you go to parties, and then the wine, acts as, what do they call it, a social lubricant, and now you're hanging out with them, and then you end up intermingling and then assimilating. But this...
It's funny because it talks about the Purim story. The wine made according to the law.
The wine, it says v'hashtiya kadat and ones. Yeah.
Sorry, continue on.
So this would explain this even better. Why? Because it's crazy for a Jew to assimilate.
Yeah.
I know. we're like 85% assimilated. But that's a new thing. It's a brand new phenomenon. We were never 85% assimilated. We were always under 1% max. Assimilated. Historically, we were never trusted that people, one person from this community maybe, or and it was a big story. But now it's like, how is 85% of Am Yisrael assimilated? That is...
You heard the number? I never heard the number.
No, it's crazy.
70, 80, it's something
the breakdown,
scary.
Honestly, it goes back grandparents and great-grandparents generation.
Scary.
And there was a big push in the U.S. when immigrants to come in as part of the prayer service and part of whatever to try to weave in the whole idea of assimilation.
He's
Right
scary.
into it.
And
It's
if you
very
tell some
scary.
people this, they get mad at you. Like, what's the problem? Then, so the question that arises from all of this is, what do you mean? How do you not see what's the problem? How do you not shaken up to your core?
Right.
It's very simple. People are asleep. People are asleep. They're just not aware. Every single Jew that tells you what's the problem, he will tell you, he will freak out if he
Right.
was awake. Every single one of them that says it's not a problem, inside of him, there's a part of him that's aware of the problem, but he's asleep to that part.
Mm-hmm.
If he wakes up to that part, he will freak out. Every single one of those, any yid that says that it's not a problem will freak out if they see it. What's going on? They're asleep. It makes sense. Yena mishum bitam. When a guy touches the wine only carries the potency of putting a person to sleep. So it makes sense. The Gemara says you touch it, he's asleep. When he's asleep, he loses touch. And when he loses touch, assimilation happens. Assimilation effectively means the end of the Jewish people. Right? If the entire Jewish people assimilate, there'll be no Jewish people within 2 generations. That's the effective definition of assimilation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Valken. We can stop here or we can go further. What do you guys want?
I'll go further. I'm good.
Go further a little bit?
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Okay, Valken. Nisa yain b'maga daika. Okay, so he's saying, now he's going a little bit into the touch, like we said earlier. So he says yain nezech happens through touch, specifically. Why specifically through touch? Kistam negia. Whenever you say the word touch, it's referring to the hands. It's not referring to the feet. It's referring to the hands. Right? So what are the hands? The hands are the vessels of a human person that connects them to the material. Phones or whatever material things that we're engaging with, you need to engage with your hands. Right? So the hands represent that. So by the hand, the material equals sleep. Material equals dissociation of a mind, of awareness of Hashem. When the mind gets dissociated, what's left? Person is operating completely from his animal self. There's no spiritual engine. It's all operation from animal self. So that's asiyah. So that's action and that's sleep. Let's call the person is asleep. So we see now a connection between sleep and material, right? And the Gemara says that there's 10 cubits, or not 10 measurements of sleep came down to the world, right? The Gemara has 10 measurements of this, 10 measurements of this, right? 10 measurements of sleep came down to the world. 9 was taken by Avadim.
So as a connection means sleep and
Material.
material. Okay.
9 of the portions of 9
Sleep.
of 10 portions of sleep. 9 of 10 were taken by Avadim.
Yeah, slaves.
9 of the 10 portions of sleep.
Were taken by slaves. Captured by slaves. Natlu Avadim.
Literally, actual.
So he's saying ki ikar hashena hu b'bchinat asiya ve'avdut. Avdus and asiya. So now we're saying that slavery. What is a slave? A slave is someone who is completely. Well, how would you describe it? Bound to.
Yeah, he has no ability to act his own ratzon. His ratzon is someone else's ratzon.
He doesn't exist, right? He's not a person. A slave is not a person in the sense that he's not. Like you say, he's not acting out his own volition. He's living someone else's life. He's completely subject to whatever that person wants him to do. So that's called asiya, right? And a slave is, the function of a slave is not to sit there as a consultant. The function of the function of a slave is to engage in the physical manual labor that we don't want to. Right, I'm sure in IT they use the word slave a lot, right? I think they want to ban it. But in IT, you have the word slave, right?
Oh, do you? Yes, sir. Yeah. You have your master and you have slaves.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it
What's
follows.
the context? I don't understand.
Well, you have, like I say, a central server, a central program, right? And everything, all the other computers that are connected into it effectively follow that central program that's on the central. So it's just a way of referring to where you have your source code and where your control is, right? That's
It's
your
not referring to,
master.
it's not referring to people.
And the slave is kind of
No, but the
it's
term
just
slave
referring-
means
It's subject is someone higher.
You can't use this
But
to
more
do anything
specifically-
else other than what's in the main code.
it's repetitive tasks that need to get done, but are subject to a master code, right? So a slave is just that in the material world is a human being that's going to do all the repetitive tasks that we don't want to do in the material world, right? So Rabbi Nathan is saying that that's slavery is just someone who engages in manual labor all the time and just bound to the labor, right? So that material and slavery is part of sleep. So waking up from the sleep is through the awareness, through the stories. And these stories wake a person up by showing them what is going on behind the scenes, what is going on, and that he is actually part of something bigger. There's one point here that's very interesting. What is a story? A story is a sipur ma'aseh. You hear this? What does the word ma'aseh mean?
To do.
Action.
Right? So we're talking about, so he's saying, we'll finish with this. So he says, how do you wake a person up from being bound by the material? By telling him a story of the material. It's a question, no?
Yeah. You think you need a story of the spiritual to wake him up to the
No.
you know?
No?
For
What do you
everything
think?
you've been telling me, that doesn't work. I had a little email interaction with my cousin. And the cousin, he's interesting character. He started getting involved with Chabad. He goes to Chabad, but he's not Shomer Shabbos, he's not this or that. And texting him, I just mentioned you gotta become fully Shomer Shabbos. And he goes, oh, it's so difficult. It's this. I'm like, listen, it's going to improve your life. It's going to be, it's like, oh, but it's too difficult.
So you're telling him a story of spiritual and he's not listening.
Exactly.
So you gotta tell him a physical story.
Well, I kind of did. I said,
What's
it's going to
it?
help your parnassa in such a positive way. He's a sales guy.
The more physical-
We're talking his language.
but
yeah.
it's true.
That's talking his language.
But it's a matter, it's just not physical enough. But the more physical, the more potential for the story to have an effect.
I sent my brother, there's a little clip from one of the rabbis I listen to on Shabbos. And it talks about, you want to have a good parnassa, keep Shabbos. Right? It's a little short 5-minute clip, whatever. So I said, you know what? I talked to my mother, and she's saying, yeah, Joe, my brother is, he's stressed out with work and whatever. So I send him this little clip, and he jokes about me. He goes, like, I'm in a meeting, and trying to make parnassa, and you're sending me this little video on how to make parnassa. It's like, okay, Joe, are you hearing the message?
There's layers. Listen,
Yeah,
there's layers.
I know.
Seems like a very Lishma type of way to become from.
But he knows with me, I can.
He allows it.
He allows it because it's me, right?
So he brings here the line from the Arizal called En Hadin Nimtak Ela B'Shosho. That judgment can only be sweetened. In other words, can only be removed at a root level. So what's the root of a person's sleep? What caused the person to go into sleep? The material.
What kind of physicality?
So how do you wake him up from the sleep? By the same way he went into the sleep.
That's what it means. That's
Yes.
based on the
Yes. I'll read you the line.
And sure.
Here. Yeah, I'll read you the line, okay?
Wow.
כי באמת דייקה על ידי זה, שעל ידי סיפור המעשיות של העולם, נמשך שינה, אוקיי? מחמד זה דייקה, מעוררין הצדיקים האמיתיים השינה על ידי סיפור מעשיות דייקה. כי אין הדין נמתק אלא בשורשו. כי מי שהוא כרוך אחר החומר, שהוא בחינת עשייה, אזי מביא שינה על ידי סיפור המעשיות. כי מחמד שמספר מעשה שנעשה. So he's saying, there's so many people that hear stories that they go further into the sleep, like the wine.
Right.
So he says, if a person's bound to the material,
Right.
then a story about the material will pull him further in.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's right, because you're telling him about you're telling him about his fantasy or whatever it is, and he's going further into the fantasies because it's pulling him in.
Right.
שזה בחינת עשייה. על ידי זה נמשך האדם לבחינת עשייה, ועל ידי זה נופל עליו שינה שהוא בחינת התגברות העשייה בחומר. אבל הצדיק, but the tzaddik, when the tzaddik says a story, he's not talking about the material, right? He's talking about something holier, something deeper, something behind him. He's talking about the engine that's fueling the material. כי מעורר מהשינה, כי על ידי סיפורו הוא מעלה ומקשר ומעורר את בחינת המעשה, but he talks through the material. He talks through the material. He talks about the orange, and he talks about the table, and he talks about the physical. You ever hear, I've experienced this. Tell me if you've ever experienced this. You ever hear someone say the exact same thing you said? Nothing fancy, but when he says it, all of a sudden everyone listens. You hear that? I've experienced this many times. Where you've heard a certain story, or you've heard a certain anecdote or something, comes along one individual, maybe a tzaddik or maybe a holy person, he'll say that anecdote, but when he'll say it, it'll take on a whole nother meaning. And he doesn't say anything special. It's not like he's a linguist. It's not like he's articulating it in a very fancy way. He's just saying an anecdote that we all heard, but when he says the anecdote, it does something, right? That's what he's talking about. Why is it that two people can say the same anecdote? One person says it, and everyone's like, the next person says, I don't know, and then all of a sudden everyone. It's because where are they coming from when they're saying that anecdote? If we're saying that anecdote, and all you can think of is the physical, or you're bound by the physical, then that anecdote pulls the people further into the physical and makes them. But if you're saying that anecdote and you and your place you're saying it from is spiritual, but you're saying the same words,
Right.
then that anecdote all of a sudden elevates and awakens the people. So that's the difference between the tzaddik. The tzaddik specifically has to use the anecdote. He must, because that's where it all started. It all started with the physical. The physical pull the person down. So through the physical, it'll pull the person up. Right? It's got to happen within that. That's what the Arizal refers to as en hadin nimtak ela b'shorsho. The judgment can only be sweetened at the root. You want to fix a problem, go to the root of the problem. Where did the problem start? Go to that point, find the problem where it started, and fix it through that point. That's what...
I heard a similar expression, that you can't, sort of the opposite. He says you can't solve a problem at the level of thinking that caused the problem in the first place.
No, he's saying the opposite, though. Yeah. You have to go into the level of thinking that caused the problem, but in that level of thinking, think differently.
Yeah. It's not like, it's like, oh, we thought this way. It's like taking that same thought process.
But you have to go to the place
to that route, and it's like you're just repeating the problem. But if you take it, think differently.
But you have to go to that space.
Yeah.
You have to go back into that realm and flip it. So it sounds the same, right? It sounds, wait, are we repeating our mistakes again? It sounds the same, and it's a very subtle. So that's where we'll keep going, but that's sort of...
When you mentioned this thing with the tzaddik talking, so there's a story I heard, I think it was at the Ben Ish Chai. He was walking with one of his students. It was nighttime, and he came across, it was a lamppost.
An outpost.
A lamppost.
A lamppost.
And he was looking at his shadow, and he went to his Talmud. He said, let me show you something about the shadow, or the light. The Talmud knew that it's not talking about shadows or light. he was talking about something much deeper than that, and just using the shadows. It's like, he said, look at this, as I get closer to the light, my shadow gets smaller, right? It's like a little observation that he made. When farther away from the light, the shadow's really big. When I come closer, the Talmud knew, he says, this is Ben Ish Chai. He's not just making an observation, a cute observation. He's speaking of some sort of very deep spiritual truth.
That's in what do we say it's called? Paragraph 7.
Right.
Talks about what is called Tamid Hagun, a worthy student.
Right.
That means a worthy student is,
Yeah, it's in lesson one, right?
That means on the receiving end,
Right.
it's not enough that the tzaddik does his part.
Right.
The tzaddik could be saying the story. Also on the receiving end, how are you receiving the story? Are you looking?
Yeah.
Are you open to finding a deeper meaning, or are you not? So that's the second part. That means it's not enough. Like, we have to be willing. Like that student of the Ben Ish Chai, he knew that there was more there.
There was more, yeah.
So when you know there's more there, those anecdotes really act as. The Arizal has lots of anecdotes. The Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov, like all the Baal Shem Tov stories, like what is that? That's why it's so controversial, because there's so many people who are asleep. When they hear the Baal Shem Tov stories, it puts them into further sleep.
Why? I should wake them up.
Because they're not looking. They're not Talmid Hagun. They're not looking for the deeper meaning.
You're saying part of it is.
I mean, Ahmad says you have to have a Talmid Hagun.
So, right. So it's part of. It's not just the stories. The story is part one of the equation. But part two of the equation is you have to have word of the recipient. The recipient has to be open-minded and receptive.
In the minimum, yeah.
If the person just is giving you just some day to be polite, as you finish your little speech, it's not going to work.
Right.
You're closed off if you're not actually open to receiving.
There's a whole minor.
It's called Tamid Sheno Hagun.
So when I got married, we did a whole Chabad, with all the Chabad.